ago, in a coffee shop not far from here, I was interviewed about my environmental work in journalism by a student from the College of Sustainability of Dalhousie University. And at the end of the formal interview, she said to me, "Can I ask you a personal question?" And I said, "Sure." And she said, "How do you keep from despair? How do you keep from despair? You're dealing with these issues like climate change, ocean acidification, biodiversity. How do you keep from despair? And what can one person do?" And I said, well, I have two methods of keeping from despair. And the first is the recognition that I'm a lousy prophet. I did not believe I would live to see a bridge to Prince Edward Island, or a tunnel between France and England, or a black man in the White House. So, in the words of the legendary Irishman, I think things will work out very differently from the way I think things will work out. The second way I keep from despair is by paying attention to the people that I work with all the time in my work as an environmental journalist. In 2010, my friend Chris Beckett and I established a subscription website called thegreeninterview.com. And on that site, we publish, in video, audio, and text, interviews, long interviews, with leading environmental figures from around the world. We speak not only to politicians and scientists and people like that, but also to cruising sailors and artists and musicians, anyone who has something to say about how we get to a sustainable future. Some of these people are famous: Vandana Shiva, David Suzuki, Paul Watson, Elizabeth May, and George Monbiot. But some of them are not famous. Betty Croswick is an 85-year-old great-grandmother who has spent 2 years in the slammer for defending the rainforest of British Columbia. Edmund Matachewaban is a Cree leader from James Bay who remembers what it was like to live in a way of life that had been sustainable for 11,000 years. Mark Boyle is known as the moneyless man. He's a young Irishman who has lived entirely without money for the last 5 years and is spreading the gospel of moneyless living around the world. And Santiago Manuel Valera is an Aboriginal leader from Peru who took 8 bullets to his stomach for defending the ancestral lands of his people. These people fill me with joy and hope and courage. What can one person do? What can one person do? This is Hugo Spowers, a racing car driver from Ludlow, England, who realized that the automobile is one of our major problems environmentally, and so he determined that he would reimagine not only the automobile, but the automobile industry. The cars he builds are made of carbon fiber. They're powered by electricity derived from a hydrogen fuel cell. They have no noxious emissions at all, and they get the equivalent of more than 300 miles to the gallon.
A fuel cell doesn't do the same things as a petrol engine. It does some of the same things. It converts a fuel into another form of energy. It is to be regarded as equivalent to an engine in that the size of the fuel cell limits the power of the car. It doesn't limit the range. The range is limited by the tank, a hydrogen tank in this case rather than a petrol tank. But it doesn't have a rotating shaft coming out that can drive the wheels. It just has electricity coming out. And so it's an overlapping but not congruent Venn diagram, if you like. And so you can't take out the petrol engine and put in the fuel cell in its place because it doesn't do the same things. And really you need to change all the pattern of relationships at once. And that dramatically reduces the risks, reduces the barriers, and enables a commercially viable fuel cell car to be produced here and now.
Hugo won't sell you the car, he only leases it. And when you're done, you hand it back to him, and he takes the body and melts it down, he takes the components and rebuilds them, and he builds another car. He wants to decentralize the automobile industry, so he publishes his plans on the internet and encourages people to take them and build elsewhere. If you want to build a River Simple car in Halifax or Hong Kong or Buenos Aires, Hugo is all for it. That's what one person can do. What can one person do? This is Pablo Fajardo, who grew up desperately poor in the Amazon forest in eastern Ecuador, a place that had been hideously polluted by the oil company for over 50 years. This is a crude oil waste dump, 50 years old, one of 1,000 that are dotted throughout that part of the Amazon. Pablo, with the aid of the Catholic Church, God bless it, made himself into a lawyer. And his very first law case was a class action on behalf of his own people in that part of the Amazon against Texaco and its successor Chevron, a case which is now known all over South America as the Chevron Toxico case. I took on the leadership of this case. I had been involved since the beginning, but took leadership in 2005. I was the only lawyer on the case in Ecuador, the only lawyer. Chevron had 20 lawyers. I had 1 year of experience practicing law. The youngest Chevron lawyer had 25 years experience. Such a big difference. They had 20 or 30 expert lawyers, and I was barely out of law school. My advantage is that I don't have to lie. I am part of the story, and the truth is in that story. After 20 years of litigation, Pablo Fajardo and his colleagues won the case in the Supreme Court of Ecuador and received the biggest judgment in the history of environmental law, $9.5 billion. $9.5 billion. Chevron skipped the country. And so the Ecuadorians are now bringing actions in other countries to try and collect that judgment from Ecuador. One of those countries is Canada, and I'm delighted to tell you that in December, the Court of Appeals of Ontario agreed that the case could proceed here. So this long odyssey in the courts may end finally in Canada. What can one person do? This is Ori Vigfushin, who was raised in a fishing village in Iceland that was shattered by the collapse of the herring stocks. Ori grew up to be a very successful businessman and an ardent salmon fisherman. And when he learned that the salmon fishery was in similar difficulties, he decided that the way to solve the problem was for him to raise the money and go and buy every single commercial salmon fishing license in the North Atlantic, from Connecticut to Labrador, from Spain to Russia. And when he comes to people to ask to buy their licenses, this is what he says.
All I want to do is to sit down with you and try to figure out what I can do to make your income, make your lifestyle better, so you get more money for whatever you're doing. So if you are catching salmon, I'm getting so much value out of it. I will try to find you something else, like lumpfish, like snow crab, like shrimps, or whatever. And I will make you improve your income. This is what I do. If I can't help you do that, that's fine. And if at the end of our negotiations you're not happy, you walk away. Nobody's hurt, and you keep your. But I would like to buy in the long term or in the short term your salmon fishing rights. So about 5,200 fishermen all over the North Atlantic now have signed up, and this represents about 85% of all the fish that used to be caught. And I think you will find them, virtually every single one of them is now happy. They have a better income, they have a better lifestyle, and it works.
Have you got that? 85% of the wild Atlantic salmon in the entire North Atlantic basin can now get back to their native rivers. That's what one person can do. What can one person do? This is Mumta Ito, who was a high-powered corporate lawyer in the city of London until she experienced a sudden spiritual awakening. She's now the founder and director of the International Centre for Holistic Law based in Scotland. And her current project is to accumulate 1 million signatures on a petition to the European Parliament to implement environmental rights in the legal system of the European Parliament. 1 million signatures from 27 countries. And if she does that, the European government has to consider passing those measures into law.
It's well known that we are facing unprecedented environmental issues. And in my experience as an environmental lawyer, I can see that the current system of environmental law that we have, which is pretty much based on a paradigm of nature as property, restricts citizens to having to bring cases through the planning and the administrative courts. And so it's very difficult for communities to protect nature per se. So the initiative that we're bringing is following the emerging paradigm that's appearing throughout the world in countries like Ecuador and Bolivia, in municipalities throughout the United States, of recognizing a natural law approach, so recognizing nature's inherent rights to thrive and to flourish. So our European Citizens Initiative is for recognizing and respecting the inherent rights of nature.
Incidentally, most countries in the world already have those rights embedded somewhere in their legal system. Your right to a healthy environment, Mother Nature's right to be respected and protected, but not in Canada. And that's why my colleagues and I at the Green Interview are making a full-length documentary film called Green Rights. It's our attempt to get that issue onto the political agenda in our own country. This is a stream high in the Amazon, but this is a stream with a dream. This is a stream that dreams of joining forces with thousands of other little streams in the mountain range like it, and forming the mightiest river in the world. These are the headwaters of the Amazon. You and I are the headwaters of the mightiest social movement in the history of the world. The environmental movement consists of more than 2 million organizations. That's organizations, not individuals, all around the world, all working on environmental issues. I'll give the last word to one of my heroes, Dame Jane Goodall, who, with her work with chimpanzees, has changed our very understanding of what it means to be human.
Basically, every single one of us matters. Every single one of us makes a difference every single day. And if we would think about the consequences of the little choices we make, what we eat, what we buy, what we wear, you know, people then begin to make small changes. And it's when thousands, then millions, start making the small changes that we get the kind of change we need.
What can one person do? What can one person do? In small ways or large ones, in the short term or the long term, one person can shape the world. One person can change the future. Walalan, merci, thank you.